Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Gorowski, and I'll be your host for today. If you've been following along all month, we've been celebrating amazing women in science, adventure, exploration, and conservation. It has been a crazy month, but all good things must come to an end, and we have our final February event today. Really excited to be joined by Jessica Sandoval. She is an avid explorer, biology enthusiast, and engineer who is passionate about exploring our ocean. For part of the year, she works as a remotely operated vehicle pilot on adventures to do deep sea sampling and learn about all the amazing life and geological features on the ocean floor. When she's not doing that, she's working towards completing her doctorate in the field of biomimetics and biomechanics at the University of California, San Diego. So she's pretty lucky because her research lets her combine her passion for biology and engineering to create really cool technologies and work in some of her love for the ocean. So Jessica, it's so great to have you joining us live today. We've got a great group of classrooms from all over North America. And after you share a little bit of your adventures, they are going to fire away with some questions.
All right, great. That sounds wonderful. Hi, everyone. To everyone that can see me on there. So thanks, Joe, for the intro there. So should I just get started with the presentation then? Fire it over?
Absolutely. Let's jump in.
All right. So I'll screen share with you guys here real quick. So you might be able to see Joeception at this point here. All right. Let's hide that here. All right. So as Joe mentioned, my name is Jessica, and I work on underwater exploration. So I work as an ROV pilot for part of the year. And when I'm not out at sea, then I also do my doctoral work over in biomimetics and biomimicry. And we'll go over what all this means, but all this really revolves around the area and the aspects of exploration. So, as you know, a lot of our Earth is composed of water and ocean, and water of some sort, and actually much of the ocean remains unexplored. And so in order to explore these oceans, we'll have to think about getting into the water, sailing across the water, and exploring a lot of this area that right now is an unknown terrain, if you will. And so at the surface along the coastlines, we can see, if we think about how we explore the water, when I go snorkeling or scuba diving out in the water, you can see that the water percolates through the sunlight percolates through the water column, and you can see corals and fish communities. But in actuality, the average ocean depth is about 2.3 miles or 3.7 kilometers in depth. And so we need to dive a bit deeper than staying in these coastal waters. So it's not as much snorkeling depth or scuba diving depth at this point. And if we were to dive down there, this is what our human eyes would see. It would be completely black. That is because light doesn't penetrate through, and you're at 2.3 miles deep. And if you guys ask me later, I have a styrofoam cup that I shrunk at this depth. So we need some form of technology to allow us to journey to these deep depths. And so if we imagine we're a fish, or if we imagine that we're these ocean technologies and we shine a light around, we might see some interesting biology or some interesting geology here on the seafloor, or maybe you'll see some shipwrecks or scuttled ships. You might see some archaeological things of interest. And so ocean technology allows us to achieve these deeper depths. And again, just some more images of things that I think are beautiful on the seafloor. I mean, you have corals, and you have a lot of life out there that seems almost remotely alien, but it's not. It's obviously just very different forms of life that we ourselves have yet to explore. We also have a lot of geological formations. So this is an example of a hydrothermal vent that lives on the seafloor as well, rather, that forms on the seafloor, and a lot of organisms live on it. Some more geology to kind of get you guys excited about ocean exploration. So these are all reside on the seafloor, and also archaeological features. So this is the USS Independence that we dove on, I think about 2 years ago now. So to the left, you can see it in its heyday with a bunch of different types of planes. And then this is about 60 years later underwater. And this was scuttled, so it means it was intentionally sank. And so as you can see, a bunch of life begins to grow, and we want to understand this life that grows a little bit deeper than we can achieve by snorkeling or scuba diving. So my question then became, how do we explore the depths of the ocean? How do we explore the deep depths? And this is our guiding friend, the holothurian, because it's a very, very fun-looking creature, this one. But how do we explore these deep depths of the ocean? And this is where my work also comes in as well. I work on board for about 3 months of the year, the exploration vessel Nautilus. And so this is run through the Ocean Exploration Trust and kind of spearheaded by Dr. Bob Ballard. And so with the AV Nautilus, we go out to these areas of interest. We'll map the seafloor, and then we'll dive at the seafloor. So what does that entail? So my roles out there are as a pilot, and I also work on maintenance of these vehicles. And so in both the piloting and the maintenance, you get to put your hands on the technology and use the technology to explore these unknown areas. So what is a remotely operated vehicle? So we use what we call a two-body remotely operated vehicle, or an ROV. And so on the nearest to the seafloor, or whatever features we're trying to explore, is an ROV named Hercules. So Hercules has 2 arms, and it has a bunch of maneuvering capabilities. It can fly around to features of interest. Then we also have, above Hercules, another ROV named Argus. And so Argus acts as a way to disassociate or separate the movements of the ship from the maneuvering capabilities of Hercules. And Argus weighs a lot in water. I'll show you just how much in a moment. Argus and Hercules are separated by what we call a tether. And I have also an example of a tether here with me. So I'll hold that up when we're doing the question and answering as well. But the tether is flexible, and it allows Hercules to move around at its own leisure, if you will. And then the 6/8 cable, which is a steel cable that connects Argus to the ship. And so Hercules, it can go and dive to about 4,000 meters water depth. And in air, it weighs about 5,000 pounds. But in seawater, it's neutrally buoyant. So that means that it's able to float in the water, in seawater, that is. And that's all primarily from what we call buoyancy compensation. And so, for instance, you can see a yellow foam here. And this yellow foam yields for buoyancy of Hercules. So it allows it to float a bit more. Argus, on the other hand, is rated to about, 6,000 meters depth. And in air, it weighs about 4,000 pounds. And we don't compensate for that. So in water, it also is pretty heavy, maybe about 4,000 pounds as well in water. And this is all controlled by a control van. So that's on the ship. So we pilot remotely from the ship in this control van, and all the instructions that we send down to the vehicles go through the 6/8 cable, through the tether. But we are on board on the control van. And so a little bit more about Hercules. That has 8 cameras, give or take. We might take one off or put one back on, but we have about 8 cameras. We have 6 thrusters on board, allows for some delicate maneuvering, and 2 manipulators. And these manipulators are my favorite things, I think, on the vehicles, because you get to grab things underwater, maneuver they act as arms, and you can begin to do a lot of maneuvering underwater. So now to take you through a day in the life on the ship. We first will launch the vehicles. This is after mapping, so this is more the day in the life of a ROV operations. So we'll launch the vehicles, and as you can see here, this is Mark, and he's sending off Argus into the water. Hercules is already in the water. And for these operations, we use cranes and A-frames in order to move these vehicles around. And then we'll descend down to the seafloor, and this is the view from Argus. You can see Hercules on the seafloor there. And we're going to be flying about, so it's like swimming through the water. And so here's a quick YouTube link just to give you an idea of what's going on here. So this is Hercules, and it's flying through a sponge field at this point. You can see it's floating above them. It's not trailblazing through. And this is a view from Hercules now. And so Hercules has those two arms, if you recall that previous image. These two manipulators, we call them. So the one that's in these images here is called the craft, or the craft predator, if you want to get the real full name. And so on the left, you can see that the craft is holding a temperature probe. So we're looking at the temperature signals, rather reading the temperature of different spots that we're interested in, or we'll take rock samples, as you can see on the right. And so we also don't only play with fancy toys, if you will, or fancy technology. We also make some of our own. We call them innovations on the go, and we might use a toilet brush, for instance, to clean off some underwater lenses, or we might use a milk jug or scoopers in order to scoop up some items of interest, like these mussels and these sea brittles and whatnot. Or we might use tubes and hockey pucks. Hockey pucks are actually, we rely a lot on hockey pucks in order to grab objects of interest, tools of interest that we've made. So even everyday household items can be used on deep sea underwater exploration, which is quite fun actually to think about. And this is a view in the control van. So this is one of the rows. This is where the pilots and the navigators sit. But then again, in the control van, we not only have pilots and navigators, we also have video, we have science communications, a whole row of scientists, and also our expedition lead that's in the control van as well. And so, but for my purposes, I'll sit in the Argus seat, and also I'll switch out with a Herc pilot. And so this allows us to interchange roles and also to communicate very frequently and very frequently about what we're doing, what procedures we're undertaking. And so my formal role is as an Argus pilot. And we also communicate with the navigator that's sitting furthest away. I'll kind of outline him here. And the navigator is directing the ship, and the ship moves. And then you can also see that there's a whole slew of cameras, a whole slew of sensors. We use sonar, for instance, for seeing in the water, if you will, but by seeing by sound. And so there's a lot of sensors and a lot of almost a dance, if you will, of a lot of different roles between the navigator, pilots, the science communicators, and video. So it's and also all the scientists and the expedition lead. So it's a big operation. That's just an insight into the control van. And the goal of this is to see these very interesting formations underwater. This is an example of diving at a hydrothermal vent. We call these giant black smokers. This is down in the Galapagos, and this was my first year. I came out as an intern, and we dove at these features over in the Galapagos. And from that point on, I was hooked. So this was in 2015. And after diving on these features, this is a hydrothermal vent, I wanted to come back, and it sold me. Became my passion and my love, was this type of underwater exploration. So this is the view again from Hercules, looking in at some of these smaller communities that live on the hydrothermal vent as well. So you really get to see a lot of different life and a lot of different geology through this underwater exploration. And then just to hone in, this is probably one of my favorite sites to see, again in 2015, as an intern when I came out. You get to see different types of bivalves. And also these are all different types of worms. This is 2 worms here that grow on the hydrothermal vents. And so from this moment on, I was sold. This is the moment I decided that ocean exploration was for me, and that I wanted to pilot and also develop technologies for exploration. And then again, going back to the day in the life, we're recovering the vehicles now. So we just saw all these interesting features and formations in biology underwater. Now we're recovering the vehicles, bringing them back on board on deck. This is a multi-person operation, as you can see, and we use a variety of tools. And Mark is directing, the movement of people on deck, making sure everyone's safe, making sure that the vehicles come on board safely. And we also, on the ROV team, we wear many hats. So here I'm operating the crane, pulling up the vehicle from the water, but a lot of ROV team is also making sure that the vehicles come on board safely as well. And this is going back to those tube worms. So now that we have all of our samples on deck, the scientists come out and they start taking all the samples that we've collected. And this is an example of one of the tube worms. As you can see, it's massively long. This is in 2015. One of those massive tube worms that I showed you a picture of before. So ocean technology, these ROVs, they're all allowing us to see these organisms, see these geological formations, see these features that we would otherwise have never known existed. And so you can see on the top left, there's a glass sponge here. You have worms. I have a very strong affinity for invertebrates, marine invertebrates. I love worms, for instance. This is probably my favorite creature, is a flamboyant squid worm. And then whale falls. Whale falls allow for, a whale fall is a fallen whale, a whale that's passed away. And a lot of organisms can now create a community off of the nutrients that these whales provide to the seafloor. And then so one more just fascinating creature, just to get you guys excited about some of these strange creatures that we see down there. This is a type of jelly, and you can see it's swimming away, and it's mesmerizing. Very mesmerizing creature, this one. So, in my time out at sea, I began asking myself the question of what about sampling delicate specimen? These these manipulators that we use are able to hold up to about, are able to crush rocks in some cases. They have about 500 pounds of grip force. So what about the really delicate specimen that we're collecting? Is there a way to collect those in a way that doesn't hurt the animals or hurt the samples or hurt the rocks or archaeological features that we're trying to collect? And so this turned into my doctoral research right now, is how can a robot grasp objects delicately? And you have these grippers that kind of act as fingers here. In this first example, you have some that will think of a balloon filled with coffee grounds, if you will. And if you pull a vacuum, if you put the balloon with the coffee grounds in it over an object of interest and you pull a vacuum on it, it's going to grip it. So maybe thinking about gripping things, but not by direct fingers, or suction cups perhaps. So these are all ways that we can start to think about a robot grasping things delicately. And then I started thinking, is there a way to look at nature to develop ways to grip? Because certainly animals have ways of gripping things as well. So thinking of maybe the gecko or the frogs or spiders or an octopus or clingfish or more, all these different organisms have ways of gripping. And I'm sure you can come up with hundreds of other organisms, other animals, even plants, and how they also think of ways to grip. So going through these a little bit now, because my research is in biomimetics, in bio-inspired robotics and biomaterials, this all entails looking at biology to develop better technology. And so, for instance, a gecko is able to grip onto a lot of surfaces, including glass walls. And geckos actually have these microscopic structures, which means that these are smaller than your own hair. Think of one strand of hair on your head. These are actually smaller than your actual hair. So it has lots of these little hairs, if you will, similar in a mechanism to the spider. So they function similarly as to how the spider and the gecko grip to surfaces. And scientists and engineers have taken inspiration from the gecko and from the spider and made think of tape that they've applied to robots and also to humans for scaling glass walls, for picking up objects, just based off of how they thought or how they studied the gecko and the spider and how they attached to things. Then if we look at, for instance, the remora, these are underwater hitchhikers, and they grip onto whale sharks and sharks. And so the remora has what they call a suction disc on the top of its head. There's the suction disc. And what this has are these little spines that are, again, very small, that can actually latch on to the whale shark, but without hurting it. And so some scientists have taken inspiration from the remora and created these suction discs that they applied to an ROV that can then latch onto a surface, and maybe I'll speed this one up, latch onto a surface, rotate, it can not dislodge from different types of forces that they apply to it, and then it can detach. And this is again on a smooth surface like glass. And then it's going to detach, and this is taking inspiration from a fish. And then one of the last ones I would like to bring up is octopus-inspired grippers. So an octopus has tentacles. And so engineers have made these fake tentacles or synthetic analogs to grip onto, for instance, in this case, a ball. And so these are all examples of taking inspiration from nature in order to maybe grip this ball delicately or grip objects in a way that we haven't been able to achieve before. So there's a lot of ways we can take ideas from organisms and learn from them in order to better enhance our technologies. So with this, I would like to finish it out. I know it might be hitting my time limit pretty soon. But I would like to leave you with these questions of, again, we're going back to our friend the Holotherian, which is in the background there. But I'd like to ask you the question of, what would you like to explore? What drives you to, what is it that you want to learn about? For me, I want to explore the oceans. That's been my passion since I can remember, probably since I could walk. What tools do you need to explore? And can you also learn from nature to develop better tools, perhaps, or to explore in a different way? So how does nature inspire you to do this, to explore? How does it inspire you to grip certain things more delicately, in my case? Or can you think of robots that can swim like fish? How can we start to engineer these tools in a way that we can explore our world better? So it's really coming together and taking the exploration, technology, and biology and bringing them all together to better explore our world. With that, I would like to thank a lot of the incredible scientists and explorers that you meet out at sea on the Ocean Exploration Trust over on the EV Nautilus. Also, where I'm doing my doctoral work over at the University of California, San Diego, in the Bio-Inspired Robotics and Design Lab with Dr. Michael Tolley, and also with Dimitri Dehaene. And yes, I can take any questions now. I can take back my screen, perhaps. Yes.
All right, perfect. Well, Jess, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you for sharing the exploration side, but also the need to find clever solutions and to looking to nature to find some of those solutions. That's really cool. And I had the privilege of sitting in the van out on the Pacific Ocean and watching Jess pilot the ROVs and pick stuff up. It was really cool. So thank you for hanging out with us today and sharing some of those adventures. Just a reminder, if any classrooms are tuning in via YouTube, you can send some questions there on the right in the chat sidebar. Let us know where you're watching from. But for now, let's start meeting some of our live classroom. So let's take a trip to Zachary, Louisiana. We have some students joining us with Mrs. Gilpin. Let's get their microphone turned on and see how they're doing today. How are we doing, Louisiana? Oh, Jess, a big group of students.
Boys and girls should not be.
Sorry, can you hear us?
We can hear you, yeah.
Okay, so we have first graders here.
Oh, okay.
I do have a question. Okay, I'm sorry, y'all. Okay, look, the camera's right there. Look at the camera and ask your question.
How do you dive so deep in the sea?
Yeah. That's a great question. So how do we dive so deep? We use these robots called these ROVs, or remotely operated vehicles. But think of a submarine, but without a person inside of it. Do you know how submarines go really, really deep into the ocean? They're able to, the submarine is basically something that goes in the water. And so we're piloting the vehicles, rather we're flying the vehicles from a ship. But these vehicles have cameras and they have a big cord. Actually, this is the cord. This is a tether, and this connects from a ship up here to the vehicles down here. And so we're piloting on the ship, but because we have this cord, think of like a cord on your computer, this is able to give power to the vehicles down below. And so that's how we're able to dive so deep, is because we're not actually in the vehicles. And even if we were, we have them that are really well built so that it can withstand the really, really deep pressures.
And then, Jess, would you say that the controls, I mean, obviously they're a little more complicated, but they look pretty similar to what you'd see like a video game controller almost with the joysticks?
Yeah. So we have joysticks that we use for flying around, and we can turn the joysticks and turn the robots underwater. Yeah, so, and we also have just think of a, actually, you're right. Just some joysticks and some buttons that we can use, and it's very similar to a video game.
All right. Let us go now. We're going to go to a classroom hanging out with us in Michigan, Mrs. Fisher's group. Let's get their microphone on and see how they're doing today. How are we doing in Michigan?
Good. Hi.
Hi.
So we are a second and third grade class, and one of our second graders has a question for you.
How could you build a octopus robot that could communicate with other octopus?
Oh, well, that's a very interesting question. Can you build an octopus robot? I think that's an area where you could actually help us out a bit, in the future. It would be very interesting to build a robot that can communicate with other animals. And right now, I don't know of any robots that actually do that. So perhaps maybe you in the future can start to build these robots that can communicate with other animals. There are some robots that do move and look like octopus, much like the one you just saw maybe on this presentation. But it's a very good question. Maybe we can build robots to communicate with animals. Yes, I think you're right.
Good point. We need some biologists to study and figure out some more of the ways they communicate. And then we need those engineers to step in and build something. So something to think about.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take a trip now. Let's go to Sarnia, Ontario. Some grade 6, 7s hanging out with Mrs. Hoole. Let's get their microphone turned on and see how they're doing. How are we doing, grade 6, 7s?
Emily, look away from the camera. Oh, come back. Nice smile.
What facts do you focus on, and how do you make sure you don't take any endangered species?
I think I heard the second part. Would you mind repeating the first part of your question too, please?
What facts do you focus on, and how do you make sure you don't take any endangered species?
Oh, I like it. Okay, so the first part of the question was, what depths do we focus on? Is that right? Okay, so the vehicles, we go wherever it takes us to an interest. So the vehicles can dive, for Hercules, it can dive a little bit shallower than Argus. So Hercules can dive to about 4,000. Sorry, we go to about 3,500 on Hercules meters of depth. And then Argus can go a bit deeper. So it's rated, so that means it can go dive down to about 6,000 meters, but it's currently limited to about 4,000 based on the cables that connect it to the ship. But as we said before, the ocean on average is 2.3 miles in depth, which is about 3.7 kilometers, if I remember the conversion. So we'll go anywhere between, a couple hundred meters to a couple thousand meters to about 3,000 meters or so. That's really the depth range that we'll operate in. And then how do we know we're not taking any endangered species? Well, we have a lot of scientists that are in the control van with us. And so these scientists have very specific permits that say that they're allowed to take a sample of a type of organism. So we listen to those scientists that are telling us, you can take that species there and just take one sample of that one. And so they have the directions and the instructions and the ability to do so with their permits. It's a great question.
All right, let's jump to another classroom this time. Let's go. Let's see, Mrs. Fennicle's group. They are grades 7 and 8 joining us in Toledo, Ohio. Let's turn their microphone on and see how they're doing. Oops, missed it. There we go. How are we doing, 7 and 8?
Oh, Ashley. Seriously? There we are. Okay, go ahead. Go in front of the camera. Okay, there you go.
So, have you invented anything yet, or given ideas that have gone to new products in stores or plan to do so?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. As a researcher, yes, I have made a couple things, and some of them I can't quite talk about yet because they haven't been either published in a scientific journal or so I have, for instance, some grippers that I've been working on that I would love to share with you guys, but right now we're in the process of publishing those. So hopefully maybe in a couple, maybe in a couple of years, you guys will see some of the things that I've made actually come out. So yeah. It's a very curious world, though, of when you're doing research, that you have to balance sending out your ideas and also publishing them to make sure that they're protected as well. But yeah, it's a great question, though, and hopefully we get out there too one day,
All right, very cool. That adds that mysterious element that some of the stuff you're working on is top secret right now.
Oh, you're right. Very top secret.
Very cool. All right, so let's go to Mrs. Barha's class. They are in Oxnard, California. They're a grade 6 class. How are we doing, grade 6s?
Hi!
All right, who's got a question?
How much did it cost to make Argus and Hercules?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. So actually, I don't actually know the figure off the top of my head. A couple $1 million each, probably. And then note too that these vehicles, some of them came online in, I think Hercules came online in 2003, if I remember correctly, give or take a few years. So that was, over 10 years ago now. And so we also do updates to them as well. So some of the cameras that we might update, or some of the other components, those might be in the order of a good couple $1,000s. So it's a very, I think, fluctuating number, but each vehicle is a couple $1 million probably.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is they cost a lot to build, and then they cost a lot to maintain as well. You gotta have to upgrade things break on them. I definitely remember watching you and the other pilots scrambling around making repairs. So yeah, they're not cheap, but they allow you to do some pretty amazing things and explore places no one else has ever seen. So it's worth the expense, I think.
Yep, definitely. But yes, you're right. I think there might be a little bit hard to put into a classroom. That's why we broadcast a lot of our dives. So yeah.
All right. Mrs. Wilcox's class is joining us from Smithville, Missouri. Let's turn on their microphone and see how they're doing. How we doing, Missouri?
I have a question. Have you guys ever explored like near Challenger Deep or the Mariana Trench?
Ooh, it's a great question. I know, well, I personally haven't. Most likely some of the folks that I work with, some other pilots that have been in the field for a few more years than I think some of them have gone out that way towards the Mariana Trench. But yeah, I would love to, but I personally haven't, not yet. It's on a to-do list though.
Yeah, and then something that deep, you definitely need a different ROV, right?
Yeah, definitely. You'll definitely need something a little bit that can go a bit deeper than ours. So ours goes to about the average ocean depth, but you'll need a manned submersible, for instance. I think James Cameron went out there a couple of years back now to the Challenger Deep. So, but you need definitely different instrumentation for that. But I think some folks that I work with might have gone out there on other vehicles and other ships.
Hopefully by the time some of the students in these classrooms get a little bit bigger, we'll be going places like that more. Because I think there's only been 3 people who have ever been that deep. So lots of cool opportunities in ocean exploration.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, let us check in. We have a few more minutes for a few more questions. Let's check in with Mrs. Gilpin's group again. I see the cameras off. Are you guys still hanging around? All right, maybe not. Maybe they had to go to recess. Let's go back to Mrs. Fisher's group and see if they have a follow-up question for us.
Go ahead, Adrian. I gotta talk to them. Yeah.
Have you guys like ever had an octopus like come up close to you guys or no?
Ooh, actually, yes. Actually, quite a few times. So, on one of the pictures that I showed, there was this Dumbo octopus. It has these almost, if you think of Dumbo, and if you've seen a Dumbo octopus, it looks like they have almost floppy ears. That one actually swam by the vehicle. It swam by Hercules one time. In other cases, we've kind of sat there and watched octopus and got pretty personal with some of them. They'll look at you a little bit. Some of them will start to swim away. But yeah, so we've definitely interacted with a bunch of octopus in one form or another. So yeah.
Yeah, if you have a chance after class day, you can go to the Nautilus website and find some really cool video clips, including there was one when we were out in October where we found what we called an octopus garden, and there was hundreds, if not thousands, of octopus protecting their eggs. Really cool. You have to check it out if you have some time. So Octopus Garden and Nautilus. I bet you if you check YouTube, it'll come up there too.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you guys go to nautiluslive.org, there's a bunch of past video clips. So yeah, that's great.
All right, Mrs. Fennicle, your microphone's on again if you have a follow-up.
So, do you know what's the most endangered animal you've ever seen?
Ooh, the most endangered animal I've ever seen. Actually can't really say because a lot of these creatures we're seeing, some of them for the first time. And so I'm not really certain as to, which ones are considered endangered or which ones aren't. Some of them live very, very specifically to, for instance, a hydrothermal event. So it's actually very difficult to say which is the most endangered because a lot of them, some of us haven't seen before, So that's the beauty of exploration, but you also don't know how many there are, and down there. So, yeah.
That's a really good point. I remember the scientists on the ship saying that you start off with 100 questions and then you come back with 1,000. So I think that's part of the fun of science is you figure some things out, but it just makes more questions.
Definitely.
Yeah. Mrs. Hoole's class in Sarnia, your microphone's on again if you have a follow-up.
My question is what's the most interesting thing you've ever seen, and what was the other? Oh, and yeah, that was kind of it.
And what was the second one?
What was the most interesting thing you've ever seen? That was the only question I could think of.
Okay, oh, I love it. That's great. So the most interesting thing I've ever seen down there. Oh, I have a tie for two, I guess. So if you remember some of those pictures of these hydrothermal vents, these big, think of almost underwater volcanoes, but they're not spewing out lava, but they're spewing out hot water filled with lots of minerals, and we call them black smokers underwater because they looks like they're smoke, but it's actually just really hot water with a bunch of minerals in it. And those are some of the most interesting geological formations I've seen underwater. And what lives on them, these giant tube worms, these giant worms that grow and they have really red, I think of them as lady lips, really red lips, but they're actually gills. And they have these white stalks. I mean, those probably the most incredible thing I've seen underwater. Tied for that is also a flamboyant squid worm, which is just a worm. It likes to undulate in the water column, but I find them gorgeous as well. They have little hairs along the side of them that when they move in the water column reflects the light. And they have little tentacles coming off of them. So they're kind of a combination of lots of things I love. So flamboyant squid worm, if you haven't heard of those, you should definitely look those up. So those are my two favorite things I've seen underwater. Thanks for your question.
Right, very cool. Mrs. Barha in California, do you guys have a follow-up?
Do you know any more about that jellyfish that you showed us?
Ooh, that's a great question. That jellyfish, I wish I did, but I do not know that much more about it besides that it's a mesmerizing jellyfish. But online, there's probably loads about it, but I don't actually know as much about that one, unfortunately.
And that's okay. I think that's the beauty of being on the ship is everybody has their specialties. So when you're up in the control van, there's the pilots and the navigators, and then there's a whole row of scientists who are watching the screens. They're telling the different facts, telling us what to collect. So it really is when you're out on the ocean like that, there's a whole team. Nobody knows everything, but everybody as a team puts all the pieces together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Mrs. Wilcox, you can have the final question. Your microphone is on.
So when you make like other technology based on animals, could you maybe make one based on like chameleon and octopus skin that can change colors?
Ooh, well, that's a great question. And yes, I think you're hitting the nail on the head, rather, hammer nail head. It's a great question and great point. There are some people that are actually looking at changing textures on robots, much like the octopus does. So they'll raise and lower certain areas on the robot to give it almost a form of camouflage. But you're right. Maybe the coloration schemes. I think these are all gray areas that are still being unraveled and explored. So yes, go looking into the colors, the textures, the patterns of organisms and camouflage. I think those are all really interesting areas that can definitely be explored in the future. I think there are some groups that are looking at that. So maybe a cool search on Google would enlighten you more than I am being right now. But yes, I think you're right. I think you're exactly right.
And I think that's good. I think we should lead them with some homework. One, to go to nautiluslive.org and check out some of the other really cool videos from the ROVs. And then two, to look up biomimicry, because we steal technology from nature all the time. And I bet you'd find a lot of cool things you use every day and you had no idea where the idea came from. So I think that's definitely worth checking out.
Much like Velcro, actually. Sorry, I know you're wrapping up. But Velcro actually was inspired by the seeds, and these seeds have little spines on them, and that's how someone came up with Velcro. Was looking at how do these things attach, and that's how Velcro came about. So things we use all the time.
So Jess, before you wrap up today, I know you mentioned you had maybe one of the styrofoam cups with you.
Oh, I do. Yes. So let's see. I have a mug for scale, but so this is a regular mug, and this is one of the styrofoam cups that we shrunk when we put it down. I think this one's to 1,000 meters, and yeah, so about the original size, about half the original size, if you will. So lots of pressure at the very bottom of the sea there. So even more constraints that these organisms have to live with.
And am I right? It's the air, right? The air is forced out, and that's what shrinks it down so much.
Right, exactly. The air is forced out, and you're left with primarily just the plastic. Maybe some of the air gets reintroduced when it comes back up, but this is primarily just the plastic shell.
Very cool. Not only are you piloting ROVs and exploring the deep sea, but then you're studying nature and using it for really cool technology. So thank you so much for hanging out with our classes today. Thank you for wrapping up our month celebrating amazing women in science, adventure, exploration, and technology. It was a lot of fun to have you joining us today.
Yeah, great. Thank you, guys. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, the last thing I'll do today is I'm going to turn all the microphones on. And boys and girls, if you want to get nice and loud, say goodbye and thank you to Jess, and then we'll sign off for today. So here we go. Awesome. Well, once again, thanks for hanging out with us today, everybody. Jess, it was great to have you. We look forward to hosting you again in the future. And we're going to sign off now for today.
Great.